and I'm going to turn it over to Jason Sanford. Jason, thanks a lot, buddy.
Yeah, Chad, thanks for the introduction. Let's just make sure this is working correctly. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Not yet.
All right, hold on. Now
we're rolling, buddy.
All right, here we go. All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking some time tonight to join us. And Chad, thank you for the introduction. So as Chad stated, we're going to take a little trip through the Rockies on the Denver and Rio Grande, a railroad that's kind of near and dear to my heart. That is actually the only railroad I collect, is the Denver and Rio Grande. You know, over the years, I've had a lot of opportunity to collect some pretty amazing stuff. And I've had stuff from the Santa Fe, Union Pacific, Southern Pacific, some other Colorado railroads. But deep down inside, I always wanted some of the great rarities from the Denver and Rio Grande. And, you know, it really started kind of on that first trip to Durango. I rolled into Durango and it absolutely blew my mind that there was there was this place where like time stood still. You get on these old steam trains, you go to Silverton, and you know, you head back into the San Juan National Forest, and it's absolutely untouched, just as it was built in the 1880s. And that always stuck with me. It was this opportunity to really transcend time and place and, you know, feel something that to me was very dramatic, because the scenery is incredible and it's very vertical. And I mean, you can just imagine, you know, General Palmer on his private car touring the line after it was built. It was just really captivating. So I took the opportunity after that, you know, a few years down the road to kind of focus on collecting just the Rio Grande, and kind of went from there. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a couple of things with you that I think are pretty neat. And hopefully you do too. So to kind of start out, so, you know, for those of you who aren't familiar, you know, the Rio Grande slogan was Scenic Line of the World. And there was a general passenger and ticket agent, Major S.K. Hooper, who kind of coined that phrase. Initially, it was Scenic Line of America, but he felt like that just did not capture adequately what they were trying to convey to the traveling public at the time. So he said, hey, we should change that America to world. And it was a very bold claim. It was very presumptuous. But either way, you know, whether you think it's presumptuous or not, it's been a bold and enduring claim that still captures the imagination today. You know, you can go and experience parts of the original Scenic Line of the World at the Durango and Silverton Railroad, the Cumbres and Toltec and Scenic Railroad, and then also the Royal Gorge Railroad, all tourist operations that still, you know, traverse parts of the line. And then this last quote, defy gravity, ship Rio Grande, that was stenciled on the window at the Minturn Yard office outside of Tennessee Pass. So it kind of really conveys that it was a very vertical experience riding the Rio Grande. Everything was steep, everything was vertical, and it's just some of the most amazing scenery you've ever seen. So we're going to take a journey here, just kind of looking at some Railroadiana, railroad antiques that were used along the Rio Grande. It's all mostly the early Rio Grande, when it was known as the Denver and Rio Grande Railway, and then also the early Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, when it was primarily pretty much narrow gauge. So that's kind of where we're going to focus. We'll go like 1880s into early 1890s, and we'll get a little bit of 1870s in there too. So it should be pretty fun. So we'll just start with the big one, the lanterns. This background picture is along the Black River of the Gunnison, and that is the Curricanti Needle, which became a prominent display in their logo, Scenic Line of the World. If you ever get the chance to go to the Black River of the Gunnison, they have an amazing display of a Rio Grande 280 on the original bridge. It's absolutely breathtaking. So we'll just start off with the big ones. So just two amazing rarities here. On the left-hand side is a Adams and Westlake 1873 model brass top. If you look at some of the features on it, it dates to about 1882 with the sprung retainer and some of the Westlake clips and stuff. But what's neat about this is 1882 was the year the San Juan extension was being completed through Chama, New Mexico, into Durango and up to Silverton. So, it was a time of great expansion for the Rio Grande. They had just kind of finished the Royal Gorge War with the Santa Fe. And I mean, it's really when they kind of escalated this idea of this scenic line of the world. So there's very few of these Adams and Westlake 82 or 73 brass tops known. And when I say very few, there's like 3. The globe on the one on the left is the only one known in red. That globe comes in red and clear. And then on the right is the only known green cast extended base D&RG globe. And that globe is really significant because that is the first known cast globe used by the Rio Grande. It's a really small serif. There's 1 known in green, 1 in clear, and 2 in red, and then that's it. And the interesting thing on the green on the Rio Grande is a lot of people call green the highball signal. On the Rio Grande, it's actually not a highball signal. It was used at the passenger stations. And according to the 1880s rule book, you display a green lantern and it means the passenger train has to stop and pick up orders. So it's actually not a highball, it's actually a stop, which is kind of counterintuitive to kind of how we interpret green today. So as far as Rio Grande lanterns go, 2 of the most amazing lanterns, in my opinion, that you ever get a chance to hold or see. Just incredible, and to think what was going on the Rio Grande during that time frame is just mind-blowing. Next are another 2 of my favorites. The one on the left is a Buck model 1880 brass top bell bottom. Those made around like 1885 because it has a sprung retainer up in the lid. And that globe in that lantern is the same as the green, but the red. So 1 of 2 known on the globes, just the small serif. And that globe by itself, I mean, it weighs like a small baby in your hands. It is very heavy because in some of those earlier red flash globes, they would use gold in the flashing, and the glass is just extremely thick. So like you hold that lantern and it's like holding a small child in your arms. It's pretty electric. The one on the right is also an Buck brass top bell bottom, but this one's an anomaly. If you look at the bell, the lower portion of the lantern, you can see it's about as wide as the top. And if you look at the one on the left, you can see the bell, the bottom portion is wider than the top, right? That's a big bell. This is actually, the one on the right is a small bell, which is, there's only 1 known. It's kind of an anomaly. No one's really sure how that came to be. It's probably like a factory error or something. But that's a small bell. It's a lantern that I saw a picture of years ago. It was like an old Polaroid picture. Most of us older guys know what that is, but for you younger guys, that's how we used to take pictures. You'd like snap it on a camera and get it developed. You had to wait weeks. But I saw this old Polaroid photo of this lantern and it just captivated me. And I had an opportunity to buy it last year, and it was just amazing. I nicknamed it Baby Bell because it's a smaller bell, and that's its name. That's what my kids call it. We all know who Baby Bell is, so it's kind of funny. But what's interesting about this lantern is, I talked to a good friend of mine, Mike Ralston, and he actually knew the provenance of this lantern all the way back. This lantern at one time actually belonged to Mac Poor, who's that famous author from Colorado who wrote the book on the Denver, South Park, and Pacific. And I've seen some of Mac Poor's lanterns, and that guy had some amazing lanterns. And this was one of his. So I kind of tracked it down through the years, and I mean, it's just really neat to kind of, when you can learn the provenance of who owned it and their connection to Colorado and stuff like that. Another noteworthy owner of this lantern, and this is was one of his personal favorites, was Bill Nouse from Railroad Memories. So Bill owned that lantern for a long time, and it was one of his personal favorites. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to kind of take care of it for many years to come. The globe in there is a red cast large serif. It's one of 3 known. So a pretty special globe there. That globe you can find in red and clear. Those 2 are my 2 favorite. I just have always really liked the Buck lanterns. Just the name Buck kind of screams Western to me. And just some of the design features that they use just have a really interesting feel to them when you get a chance to hold them. Here's some more Buck brass top bell bottoms. These are also big bells. And there's just like little features between them where you can see variations in the caps, variations in the thickness of the strap that goes on the bell where they have the maker's mark, just like little things here and there that kind of show they were kind of made from like the 1880s up until about 1888. So it's kind of interesting when you've had the opportunity to hold and see a lot of them, you just notice all these little variations. The one on the right it came out of an antique store on Broadway in Denver. I told this story last time, 2 guys walk into an antique store, one goes right, one goes left. The guy who goes right finds this lantern. The guy who goes left, who knows what he found, probably like a short globe or something. But I mean, just cool stories have always kind of come out of South Broadway there, where the infamous Caboose Hobbies was. And there's some very cool stuff that's come out of Broadway in some of those antique stores. So a couple more. The globe on the right is just a big D&RG by itself in a block. That's a fairly rare globe. There's like 4 or 5 of those known. It comes in clear and red. So just love the Buck brass tops. They're just really neat. A couple more. So the one on the left is also a Buck brass top. This one's interesting. This lantern on the left hung in a hardware store in Montrose for like years. And the old Rio Grande, the old original transcontinental Rio Grande, kind of went through the back of the property. And the guy had that lantern for years, and Bill Nouse was always in there trying to buy it. And he eventually ended up with it. And then it ended up with one of Bill's friends. But that's a really interesting lantern too, because it's a little bit later brass top, where there's some changes in the cap. There's some changes in the smoke dome, where you can see it was kind of made a little bit later in the 1880s. And then the one on the right is actually an Buck tin top. So it looks just like a brass top, but instead of having a brass cap, it's just a pressed piece of tin. And as far as Rio Grande tin tops go, they're actually more rare than the brass tops. Usually we equate brass top lanterns to rarity, which most of the time that is the case. But when it comes to the Rio Grande, there's only 3 known tin tops from Buck, 3 or 4. So very rare. Funny story about this one is it was up for auction years ago. And this was before there was a lot of online bidding. And so I had a friend, he called the auction house and said, "Hey, what's the tin top up to? Like, what's the current bid?" And the auctioneer said, "Oh, it's 12. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, that's too rich for my blood," thinking it was 12,000, but it was only 1,200. So everyone stopped bidding, and it went for like $2,500, which was for a D&RG tin top kind of a deal of the century. So that one's kind of been around for a little bit. I mean, it's amazing. The patina's perfect. This guy who had it in Denver, I mean, I would love to buy his house, because every lantern that I saw come from his collection, like it was like in like basically the wine cellar for lanterns. Like everything was aged perfectly. It was all dry Colorado tin, had beautiful patina, and it was just pretty incredible. It was how it just aged in his basement. So it was actually really neat. So D&RG tin top, just pretty cool. And it's always really neat to see these lanterns where the railroader wrapped the bale. Kind of really gives it a human touch. I mean, you can see that to some people, it's pretty disgusting. But there's just a lot of crud and kerosene and dirt and history and sweat kind of baked into those wrapped bales. And it adds a lot of character, in my opinion. And quite frankly, I think they smell amazing. So here's a couple of Adams and Westlake lanterns. The one on The left is an 1889 Adams and Westlake, and then the one on the right is a 1892 Adams and Westlake. So the early 89s are pretty hard to find. There's only like I think 4 or 5 of them that have turned up over the years. And then the 92s are next to impossible for some reason. I've only ever seen 2 of them. And the 1892 lantern is interesting because, you know, they're made in 92, 93 during the big silver crash, where there was a lot of economic turmoil in the country. So you don't see a lot of the 92 Adams for any railroad really, because it was just, there wasn't a lot of money to be buying lanterns during that time. So those are pretty kind of special to see when you get to see those. And they have the single wire guard. The Adams and Westlake Adams is just kind of the quintessential railroad lantern as far as lanterns go. It just looks like a railroad lantern. It feels like a railroad lantern. So it's always neat to see those. The one on the left, that's the only known blue cast D&RG RR. So that dates to right around turn of the century. That's in a 92 double wire guard, which are more common than the single wire guards. And then the one on the right is actually a national brass, which is one of these oddball makers. The D&RG is interesting because there's a fairly small railroad, had a lot of financial troubles, but for some reason they have all these like oddball lantern makers that like 1 or 2 frames will turn up. Like they were like, I don't know if they were getting them for free or if they're samples or what they were doing, but they have a lot of makers for being a small railroad. But the oddball makers are very hard to find compared to like the Bucks, which you see a lot of, and then the A&Ws, and then you get into the oddballs, National Brass 2, RR Signal 2, Liberty, less than 10, and then Star Headlight, you know, just like a handful. So it's kind of interesting. Speaking of Liberty, the one on the left is a Liberty. So there's less than 10 of those known. And I will say the twist off pot, the fuel pod on the bottom of the Liberty, is the most complicated contraption I've ever seen. It takes 2 people to get it off. For some reason, they decided to put locking tabs on both sides, and you can't get your hand around it to be able to hit both of them at the same time. So you kind of have to have a friend. But there's just a lot going on with those Liberties that are interesting, you know, and they wrap the verticals around the horizontals. They're very like stout lanterns. They're tall. They're very tall for some reason, but they're very neat. And then the one on the right is an RR Signal. I had only ever seen one RR Signal over the years from the Rio Grande. And it was a cool lantern because RR Signals for some of the Western roads like Union Pacific, and you just don't see them. You see them more on the east. So a guy called me and said, hey, I have a lantern for sale. And he told me what it was out of my chair, because I just like, oh my gosh, I never get a chance to own an RR Signal for the Rio Grande. So that was kind of really special to pick that one up. And because they're very distinct. I mean, the lower horizontal is round, the top one's flat, and then they kind of have this big flat ring around the fuel font. So they're, once again, they're just like really beefy lanterns that are very distinct looking. So pretty cool there. Okay, so this one's not marked Rio Grande, but this is an important piece of Rio Grande history. So if you're familiar with the Rio Grande, you're familiar with the Monarch branch, which was that branch line outside of Salida that went to the Colorado Fuel and Iron limestone mine. And a lot of that limestone was used to for coking at the coke ovens in Pueblo to create all the rail and the steel and all that stuff. So before the limestone mine was there was a gold mine there called the Madonna mine. The Madonna mine was in what was known as Monarch, Colorado, Chaffee County. Kind of started in 1878. And when you see those early pictures of the Rio Grande outside of Salida, you can just see all these cars lined up at the gold mine at what was known as the Madonna mine. So this is a Buck brass top, double marked on the lid and on the bell, Madonna mine, only one known. They had a small 2,500 foot tram railroad that went from the mine down to the loading of the rail cars that shows up in the photos. And this is a lantern that survived there. Turned up in an antique store in Salida for like $35. The guy walks in there and says, "Hey, what's this?" And the lady's like, "I don't know. It came from some gold mine up on the hill." So he picked it up for $35, and it's the only one that's ever surfaced. And it's also cool that it's a buck product, because all the early Colorado railroads were buck customers. So you see a lot of, Denver, South Park, and Pacific had bucks. D&RG had bucks. Gilpin Tram has buck keys, and I mean, all kinds of stuff. So buck was a big supplier of those early Colorado railroads. So the fact that you had this buck lantern turn up at this early gold mine is pretty significant from a Railroadiana historical perspective. So it's pretty neat. So that concludes the lantern section. Next on to keys. The picture in the background is on the backside of Cumbres. You can actually ride along this on the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad, which is an amazing experience. And I will say they have some pretty amazing food. And I heard they brought the enchiladas back. The turkey was amazing. The desserts were amazing. And I can't wait to get back and try the enchiladas. So keys. So here we go. The one on the left is the infamous Denver and Rio Grande Railway Buck switch key. No one's found the lock for this key. The Rio Grande, for some reason, once again, being a small railroad, seems to have used like 3 or 4 different switch cuts, 4 that I've been able to figure out. And this is a pretty low numbered key, number 34. So it belonged to employee number 34. It's hallmarked Buck on the back. And I mean, it's an amazing piece of history from, once again, the early years of the line. The one on the right is Denver and Rio Grande Railway. You see those more frequently. They're still pretty hard to come by. It's a switch key, fairly low serial number, not as low as 34. And it has what we know is like the Denver and Rio Grande Railway switch cut. It's an earlier cut, has a little bit of curve to it. Which we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that, I mean, just 2 great pieces of history there. The one on the left is Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, but it was made during a time when it was Denver and Rio Grande Railway, because it has the railway switch cut. Because there's been a lot of conversation and talk around, did they use railroad and railway interchangeably and all this stuff? And I firmly believe they did. Sometimes we like things to be in very nice sequential order. Like first it was RW, then it was RY, then it was RR. It just doesn't pan out like that, because you have these keys that turn up that are clearly marked RR when the railroad was RY. The one on the right is actually an early Dayton key, which also has the railway cut on the bit. The one on the right, or the left, is an RY cut also, but is marked RR. And then the one on the right is marked RR, but is finally the final iteration of what was the railroad cut, which they used all the way until the end of service. So pretty interesting there, to kind of see that it's not very cut and dry, this railway debate when it comes to the Denver and Rio Grande. And case in point, the key on the left is marked Denver and Rio Grande Railway, but it has the railroad cut. So it kind of also very interesting. So it gets a little confusing. And then the key on the right is marked railroad, nice early taper barrel key, manufactured by Bohannon. And then the key on the left is also a Bohannon key, but it's kind of stamped a little bit different than the previous Bohannon, kind of tighter letters. Bohannon's interesting because Bohannon, on all his locks, he stamped his patent date of 1878. So everyone thinks they're getting these like 1870s locks and keys, which they kind of didn't change through the 1880s. So the patent dates, you got to kind of be careful there. It's not the end all be all when it comes to dating things. And it's true with lanterns too. Just because it has a 73 patent date doesn't mean it was made in 1873. You have to kind of look at some of the other features and stuff. Then the key on the right, this is actually the only one of these I've ever seen. It's an early Union brass product, and it's like a coach key marked Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. But once again, like pretty early Union brass, like early 1880s. And they were still using the railway marking in the early 1880s. So once again, it's just not very clear and cut. but it is kind of neat to kind of see these old coach keys and, think about, that experience of the early passengers in the 80s and 90s and 1870s and, kind of who was carrying that from like a conductor perspective. So that is the keys. And then right here, we have a tale of two keys. So this was pretty mind-blowing to me. So it's kind of, there's been a lot of discussion about key serial numbers, and it's kind of agreed upon that every key has a serial number on it and is assigned to an employee. And that's kind of how they do inventory control and stuff like that. A lot of that information kind of comes from some of the older collectors who have talked to guys and read stuff. And so that's kind of the working theory. And I think this probably proves that. So what we have here is two keys, right? The key on, so we're looking at the left-hand side of the presentation. The key on the left actually has the RY cut, but it's marked RR. The key on the right has the RR cut, which is different, and they both have the same serial number. So in theory, both these keys belong to the same employee, who's a pretty early employee of the Rio Grande, employee number 21. And he worked for the railroad while they had both switch cuts. So the majority of his work based on wear and tear was done while the railroad was RY, based on the key on the left. And then eventually he was issued another key, the key on the right, for when they changed the switch locks to the other cut. So that is the first time and the only time I've ever seen two keys with the same serial number. And they're almost the exact same key, but they have different cuts because of how the Rio Grande did switch cuts. So, if anyone has that from another railroad, I'd love to see it, but I've never seen two keys with the same serial number. So pretty cool. I mean, that was in a recent auction, and it blew my mind when I saw it. I was like, well, that's a really low serial number, but looks familiar. And then I was like, wait a minute. So I kind of had to have that one. So it's pretty crazy. So that's the key section. Going on to locks, picture in the background is the high line along the Durango and Silverton. Once again, very vertical. You can go and ride the Durango and Silverton and see this exact view. It's pretty much exactly like this, just untouched, and will blow your mind every single time. I do it every year in the summer and in the fall, and it still captivates my imagination every single time. And they just provide a great experience. I had an opportunity to ride it in the winter for the first time, and we got up to Cascade, and it derailed. And so it derailed when they were backing up into the Y. So we were stuck there all day in what was like your typical Colorado winter, right? It's sunny, a blizzard, freezing cold to another blizzard. And it took them all day until they finally sent so it was with the diesel. And then they finally sent a steam train to rescue the passengers. And I was out just wandering around, following the workers, watching them try and re-rail this thing. And it took like all day. We didn't get back into Durango until about 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And, everyone else is kind of freaking out. They're missing flights. They're missing their next trip to Vail, et cetera. And it was, quite frankly, like one of the best days of my life. And they came and said, hey, just so you guys know, we're going to refund you half your money. And I thought to myself, joke's on you guys, you could have charged me double. So it's pretty fun. It's a great experience if you get a chance to go do that. I don't think it derails all the time though. So that's probably not very common. Okay, locks. So once again, the Rio Grande kind of being this early railroad without a lot of money, they just have all this stuff that I don't know why they were buying it, but they have the earliest known railroad marked Miller pancake lock for some reason. Is the one on the left. It's marked D&RG RCO for Railway Company. And it's the first Miller locks that were made for the railroads. Like the Rio Grande's like, yeah, we're going to buy those. So it's just, once again, it's just kind of weird. This little hometown railroad in Colorado is like, oh yeah, we'll buy some Miller pancake locks. And then the one on the right is actually the first cast lock from Miller for a railroad. Like, it's just kind of very bizarre. I don't know the connection there between Miller and the Rio Grande, and why they were buying some of these first locks that Miller was making for railroads. It's really fascinating. So the one on the right is like the early train box lock. Train box is kind of like those big boxes you see on the tenders and on the side of the locomotives where they would keep lanterns and class lights and stuff like that. So as far as the early D&RG train box, there's very few of those. The one on the left, the early Miller stamped one, is the only one known as far as I know. And then the one on the right, I think maybe there's one or two other ones. There's just very few of them. Couple more Miller locks. You get into the car lock, which they'd use to lock high grade ore shipments, which is a big part of the Rio Grande story, right? Shipping silver and gold and high precious ore from all these small mining towns. So those are pretty neat pieces of history to own. The one on the right is the later train box. There's kind of some little like dating things you can do there about where the rivet is or the pin or the shape of the background pebbled finish and what they call the ears and how it looks on the lock. So there's all these little tricks. And Bill Cunningham, speaking of RCAI back issues, Bill Cunningham did a great, I think it's 2-piece article on Miller push locks, and has a lot of the Rio Grande Westerns, and it's great. Some great information in there. He always does great work. The one on the left is just so neat. Denver and Rio Grande Railway ice house, kind of back in the day where, before we had the common convenience of a freezer, they kept the ice in an ice house, the walls were a few feet thick, just packed with sawdust to try and keep that ice for shipping perishables. So that's an amazing piece of history. The one on the right is a real early Denver and Rio Grande Railway switch lock. It's not the earliest. It's probably like second or third generation lock that they used. It takes the RY cut. It's made by Post & Co. This lock was actually found by this guy named Ed Cochaver, and he was driving through Gunnison, and it was on a lady's garage locked up. And he said, "Hey, can I buy that lock?" She's like, "I don't have a key to get it off." And he was a railroad collector, and he had a ring of keys, and he says, "Oh, I do." And he popped it off and gave her a couple bucks for it. And that's kind of how that one was found. I have a friend, he has one that was found in Uray, which was just an amazing D&RG terminus. And they're pretty rare locks. Sue at Railroad Memories recently had one at from the Frank Kidd collection. So they're pretty neat pieces of history. The one on the left is made by Dayton. And that's the first cast lock that the Denver and Rio Grande used. And the Dayton key, for example, also has the RY cut, where it has a little bit of curve to the bit. So even though it's the first cast lock, it's not cast RY, it's cast RR, even though the cut was still the RY cut. So that's pretty interesting. But that's the first cast lock, the Dayton, that the Rio Grande used. And then the one on the right is, just the one everyone gets excited about, the Denver and Rio Grande fancy back. I mean, they're great locks. Sometimes there's a misconception that they're really early. They're actually, 1890s. They're not that early. And it's interesting. There's actually been a few of them that have survived, and more kind of come out of the woodworks. They're not as rare as they used to be. So they're actually obtainable. But it's neat. If you go ride the Durango in Silverton, they have an amazing little museum there. And they have one of these locks. It's really beat up because it was dug, but it was just dug right out of the yard there in Durango. So it's just kind of neat to see that stuff, kind of where it was used and where it came from. All right, silver in China. The background picture is from the Denver Public Library. This is actually the inside of a Rio Grande dining car around the 4th of July. If you go to their website, you can look up the picture, just type in dining car Rio Grande in the search, and you can actually see a Rio Grande ice bucket, silverware, teapots, and all kinds of stuff in this picture if you zoom in. So it's pretty neat to kind of see it in use. Okay, so a couple silver in China. Personal favorite of mine. I got this out of an auction. It's got these weird Renaissance heads on it. It was like some type of coffee or tallow pot or coffee pot. The head on the top is a man kind of in this old English garb. And then the head on the handle is actually a woman. And I'm going to be honest, when I got that in the mail, I thought I was going to open it up and there'd be some ashes in there because it just kind of had this spooky feel to it. Or like some ghost would come out, like on Ghostbusters or something. It was just one that I was just like really anxious to hold because it just looks so different than anything I'd ever seen. It has a real early manufacturer's mark, so it most likely came out of a private car. So it would be really interesting to hear if this thing could talk. Just every time I hold it, I'm just, wow, that's really neat. Because you just don't see Railroad China with these like weird heads, and it's very almost Gothic Renaissance. So that's probably one of my favorite pieces of silver that I've ever seen from the Rio Grande. Here's another one you don't see. It's the cake platter. And that's my mom's frozen fruit cake for Thanksgiving on there. I did like a little, Instagram post on it. It's Denver and Rio Grande in the old English style lettering. So real early. And once again, not a very common piece you see because it would be kind of used for special occasions. And I've actually never seen another silver cake platter from the Rio Grande. Pretty interesting. It's once again, it's got that real early old English Denver and Rio Grande lettering. All right. So before the railroad had dining cars, they had eating houses that were known as the Rio Grande Hotel Co. This piece on the left, it's only a shard. It was dug out of the dump in Leadville. I would love to see a piece of that china intact. It's got the old English lettering. It has a Union Porcelain Works maker mark on the bottom, so real early. And then the piece on the right is a double egg cup, one of 3 known. Also marked Union Porcelain Works on the bottom. And then in front of it is an original business card from the Salida Eating House, which was known as the Monte Cristo Hotel, that shows up in some of the old photos. But if you just, if you read the front of that card, I mean, if you can see, I mean, just some of those places, it's all the places we want to go. Black Canyon in Cimarron, Union Depot in Pueblo, Monte Cristo in Salida. And then the eating houses were in Pueblo, Salida, Leadville, Cimarron, Minturn, and Grand Junction. I mean, just all the places that scream Denver and Rio Grande, original narrow gauge transcontinental. So Rio Grande Hotel Co. stuff is extremely difficult to find. Me personally, I'd love to own a couple more pieces, but you just never see it. So pretty special stuff. The next one is one of the very first patterns that the Rio Grande used. It's called Buena Vista. And it's this beautiful green leafy flower that you find in Colorado. And there's very few pieces of Buena Vista that survive for some reason. And a lot of it's kind of these like real dainty, ornate pieces. I've seen an egg cup. I've seen 2 of these creamers. And then I have seen a plate, like a dinner plate, and then a platter. But other than that, there's just no other Buena Vista to be found. Very rare. Next, you get into kind of where the Rio Grande starts to use this Scenic Line of the World logo on their china. You'll notice this is actually brown instead of the black, which you see more common, because this is made by Bauscher, and it's from Germany. It's the very first china manufacturer they used, and not a lot of it survived. The little demi cup on the left was actually found in Salt Lake by a friend of mine, and then kind of got passed through some hands through the years. And then I had a chance to buy it, so I brought it back to Salt Lake. Not sure how it ended up here. But it's this brown logo. It's marked Bauscher, Germany on the bottom, and just really has a fine china feel of not being mass produced. It's very, very beautiful stuff. And there's very few Bauscher pieces out there too. Like I would love to own some more Bauscher pieces, but you just never see them. And then this right here is like the Bauscher piece I want to own. It's the rarest pattern from the Rio Grande. It's interesting because they use the Scenic Line of the World logo, but then they put the railroad reporting marks on the side, which almost seems kind of redundant considering they spelled out the name of the railroad. But it's very weird. It's very hard to find. It did not hold up well in service. Like it has a tendency to be very worn if you do find it. But this piece marked Bauscher, Germany on the bottom, and just absolutely immaculate. That's one I would love to own. Just Bauscher's just special. And then here's the later logo that they use. You can see it's black in color. And that's what you see from manufacturers like Syracuse, and you just see tons of it, right? Especially, the more common stuff like plates and stuff like that. But then when it comes to kind of some of the rarer pieces like the egg cup, the butter pat, you don't seem to see a lot of it. It didn't survive. And one website I really like is narrowgauge.discussion.net. And there's like some stories on there when the Rio Grande was shutting down dining service. Like these guys are buying piles of china for their house, like plates and saucers and all kinds of stuff. It's kind of cool to hear that. But not a lot of these like small dainty pieces like the butter pats and the egg cups and stuff like that. So, okay, that's the china. So now we'll kind of get into noteworthy items. These kind of didn't really fit anywhere, but I think they're super cool. Background picture is actually Monarch, Colorado. And you can see the structure kind of on the right-hand side standing by itself. That's the Madonna mine that we talked about earlier. Okay. In my opinion, one of the coolest things out there. The earliest known hat badge from the Denver and Rio Grande. 3 of these are known to exist. One of them's in the Colorado Railroad Museum, and then the other 2 are in private collections. I was fortunate enough to buy number 9 last year, I think it was. Yeah, last year. And then a friend of mine owns number 12. So we're able to put them together and kind of take a picture together. What's really neat is they're jeweler made by some jeweler in Denver. And the stamping of the badge is the same between all 3 badges, but the scroll work and engraving is different between every single badge because it was just done by hand. And you see some common features, but each one has its own unique feel to it. So just an amazing piece of history. I saw a picture of some conductors on La Vida Pass outside the depot. And if you scroll in, you can see one of these badges on them because they're very big in size. They're kind of a larger badge, but just one of those items you hold in your hand and it's just absolutely electric. And one of the things that's interesting is all the 3 that survived are 6, 9, and 12. So like 3 digits between all of them. It's very weird. There's no like 1, 2, 3 or 4, 5. It's just 6, 9, and 12 are the 3 that survived. And I don't know the significance if it's an employee number or what. So, but just an amazing piece of history. Like it's just one of those rare pieces that's very electric in your hand. This is kind of neat. This is a station platform lamp. I'd never seen one of these before, but once I saw it and kind of saw what it was, I went back, looked at some old photos, and there's the depot in Salida. You can see one hanging on the wall. It hangs on kind of a bracket on the wall, so you can take it on and off, and you can light the platform for the passengers or unloading freight at night. So it's real early. It's marked D&RG RR on both sides on the top. And what's neat about this is if you ever get a chance to see an original framed William Henry Jackson depot print from the Rio Grande, they use the exact same green paint on the picture frames as they did on this station lamp. So I don't know if they were using that on a lot of items inside the depot, but it's the exact same paint, exact same color. It's like 100% match. It's the weirdest thing. So kind of interesting. This is pretty neat. This is a Waltham D&RG special, 21 jewel pocket watch. They're pretty rare. I don't have the exact count, but it's a pretty small batch that was made. These were made as a gift for railroad executives, for like Christmas or something. And just immaculate. It's jeweled. I mean, I had a chance to own one. I actually took one and rode the Coombers and Toltec, and that's how I used to keep time along the trip. Kind of goofy, but it was neat. So that's the Waltham D&RG special. I've only ever seen 2 or 3 of them that have survived over the years. So pretty neat, just something you don't see every day. It's marked on the outside of the face, D&RG special, and then engraved on the inside, D&RG special. This is the earliest known button used by the Denver and Rio Grande with the intertwined D&RG logo. And it's interesting because if you find some of the passes from the 1880s, like the trip passes, I think it's a ticket agent pass, if I remember correctly, they have the same logo on the pass. And the manufacturer of this button, the hallmark on the back, was actually a maker of Civil War uniforms. And General Palmer was a general in the Civil War. So it's kind of interesting to see how maybe that ties together, just kind of speculation, but makes you wonder if he knew of that company making buttons and uniforms because of his time during the Civil War. And then this is the last item. So we're all familiar with the Rio Grande Southern silver filigree passes and the Silverton flat passes. This is the only silver pass you can get from the Rio Grande, but it also happens to be made out to two other railroads. So the Colorado Midland and the Union Pacific. So this is the TPA convention, hosted a convention in Denver in 1890. So it's dated on the right-hand side. And what's interesting about this is like the TPA convention had like serious financial problems in 1890. Yeah, they still took the time to make these really cool passes. And the scene is the Toltec Gorge along the Coombres and Toltec. And if you take a magnifying glass and you, on the left-hand side, you can see a train coming out of the tunnel. And if you look at it, it is literally a 460. It's that detailed. And the 460 is what the Rio Grande used to pull passenger trains. And, you know, there's still some in existence, and they did an amazing job restoring the 168, which runs on the Coombres and Toltec. I mean, it's just amazing that someone went to that much detail to accurately capture like what the Rio Grande used on the line for passengers. Like, it's just pretty mind-blowing, actually. You think they would just kind of do more of a generic kind of engine, but they full on did it as a 460. So that's pretty cool. And once again, you know, if you get the chance to visit Colorado and ride the Coombres and Toltec, it's just as spectacular. So these are kind of always kind of neat to hold. And there's actually, you know, a few of them that have survived. They come up kind of periodically. There's a gold pass out there that's made out of gold. I saw a picture of that. That's pretty neat, but most of them are silver. So with that kind of concludes our journey along the old Rio Grande. Kind of a whirlwind of items, but I want to make sure we had time to get through all of them. So with that, you know, I just, you know, once again, want to thank everyone for joining. And, you know, it's just, like I said, it's just, there's this idea that you can transcend time when it comes to the Rio Grande, because you can still go experience it. You know, the Denver, the Durango and Silverton, the Coombres and Toltec, the Royal Gorge, they do an amazing job preserving history, and you can go experience that history. And then if you get the bug, you can own a piece of that history. So that's what's really cool about this hobby in general, is we can all have these little museums in our house and preserve this for the next generation. So
Awesome, Jason. Great items, great stories, well researched. That's one of the best parts of Jason's presentations. Quick question, Jason, on the key for employee number 21.
Yeah.
Which locks would those have opened?
So that's what's interesting is they'll actually open both the locks for some reason. Like you can do one cut or the other, but for some reason there's still a very distinct cut between the two. So it would open the Post and Co. The 21 will open a fancy back because they use that cut for a long time. They'll both open the Dayton. So it's just kind of weird why they refine the cut like that.
Yeah.
So, but it's still mind blowing. They're both got the same serial number. I've never seen that.
Absolutely. Again, if you have a question, feel free to type it in the Q&A or the chat feature or raise hand. We do have a question related to the lanterns, Jason.
Yeah.
On the earliest lanterns you showed, the globe uses a serif font and the bells are embossed with the sans serif. Is there a reason for that or any explanation?
No, and I'm not sure why that is. I know Buck, for example, they used pretty straightforward like dyes on their embossing of their lanterns. I mean, even the Denver South Park and Pacifics, which are model 1876, it's not a super fancy letter by any mean. So I don't know why there was this idea of let's get really fancy on the glass and do like, especially when you look at the early globes that are a real small serif, like that is some very detailed work to cast those. I'm not sure what the thinking was there. So that I don't know, but people seem to like that serif for some reason.
Yeah, and speaking of the small serif on the green cast, I think you said there's one in clear and red, or
So there's one in clear, one in green, and two in red.
gotcha.
Yeah. And other than that, there's no other small serifs.
Yeah, and I assume, Bo Brown and I had this conversation at the Columbus show this weekend, but it's kind of unique when you start looking at rule books. I don't know, D&RG probably did they have amber pre-Corning, or?
So I've never personally seen the amber extended base, but I heard from Gary Hepler, who since passed, that he saw it. And Gary passed a few years ago. So this was before everyone had a cell phone and could easily snap a picture, right? And then John Toll, who's also passed, saw it also. Where that one ended up, I don't know. I would love to see it. So yeah, but they do have them in Corning though.
Okay, yeah, that's the same way. Sid Suggs is on here too. I've also conversed, Southern, there's no known Southern extended base. CNO's the same way. Just it wasn't in the rule book until, after 1902, after Corning showed up. There was no use.
Yeah, but some of those extended bases, like that blue one I showed, that's the later font style. And those are kind of like turn of the century extended base globes. They're not that early. Because they also, in that same font style, and this is supposedly what the amber is, they do a solid red. It's not flashed, which is more of a turn of the century style red globe. So.
And you mentioned the amber. What lies out there, not just lanterns, but just in general, I guess, in intrigue, if you will, what have you heard that's out there that may or may not exist, but just, not only would you like to own it, but, just seeking validation that it's out there.
Yeah, no, I know there's a early buck, like a pre-model 1876. So we're talking like early 1870s, embossed D&RG RY in just really big letters. I have a picture of it. It's not very good. And I know where it is. And there's been a bell that's turned up. And so the big speculation is there a cast globe to match? Because on those early bucks, they use kind of this onion shaped cast globe, which you would find on like the St. Louis Iron Mountain and Southern. It's like a really distinct, and the letters are huge. It would be interesting to see if there's a D&RG RY onion shaped cast globe, which would be mind blowing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also, the one I'd like to know if it exists, there's the Buck key marked D&RG RW. I would like to see a lantern marked D&RG RW, which would just be amazing. And I've never even heard of one or seen one or anything. And I've never talked to anyone that's heard of anyone either, but you just think there would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Along the lantern, something else that was discussed at Columbus this weekend is kind of, I wouldn't say difference, but us Eastern guys, we kind of like things shiny and back to restored condition, if you will. And you Western guys seem to prefer it as found. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, you deal with hardware every day. I'm not just talking D&RG, but just talk a little bit about that and what you're seeing, as far as the trends and what people are preferring in that fashion.
Yeah, so most of the guys that I run with in the West, kind of the ones that all the names, that kind of everyone knows who they are. Our favorite word is patina, which is kind of this, it's personally my favorite color because it's not just one color. It's kind of this blended molten tin, dark rust, but not rust anymore, kind of just molten color that just, it's dry, it yells West. Like, as far as the more advanced Western collector goes, it's all about patina. Like, show me nice patina. And there's stories of lanterns that had nice patina, Western lanterns that have subsequently been cleaned, and they're heartbreakers. It's like, oh, like for example, one of the RGS lanterns, years ago had beautiful patina, and the guy cleaned it, and luckily it's kind of started to come back. But people are like, oh my gosh, there's an RGW that had been cleaned, and stuff like that. Where for the Western guys, they like patina, and if you can get patina mixed with what like a lot of guys call dry Colorado tin, oh my gosh, it's perfect. But yeah, so I don't know, because I follow some of the Facebook groups and stuff, and there's some guys out there doing some pretty cool stuff with like non-invasive cleaning, like some of these electrolysis tanks and stuff like that. And I do some non-invasive cleaning, using like the easy off oven method, which kind of takes off some of that what can be very dangerous, dark, like bright rust, which will eat through the lantern if you don't take it off. So I think there's kind of a fine line there, but there are, I mean, and that's the thing, right? I think from a hobby perspective, it's not defined like it is in the coin world. You clean a coin and oh my gosh, there went half its value. I don't think that's necessarily the case in Railroadiana.
Except
I think we're kind of figuring that out.
Builder plates.
What?
Number plates or builder plates now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's varying by category too.
Yeah.
Like no one likes polished keys. You like kind of that darker brass patina, but people like super tinny lanterns. So I think by category, we're kind of still figuring it out. And I think we're kind of seeing different factions of belief. And the Western guys are real heavy on patina. So.
Which that's what makes this fun.
Yeah.
So, got a question typed in from David. What are some of the earliest lanterns used by D&RG? Just, I guess, kind of recap the beginning there.
Yeah, so the earliest known lanterns that I've personally seen have all been bucks. So the Railroad Museum in Gunnison, the Pioneer Museum, has an early marked D&RG RY Co. buck. There's been some like smashed lids turned up, marked D&RG RY Co. that are buck. The big early onion style buck is buck, obviously. And then the model, I've never seen a model 1876 buck for D&RG. I've only ever seen model 1880s, but they were just a big buck user. I mean, that early D&RG key is buck. The earliest known switch locks are buck. So I think they bought a lot of buck stuff.
Again, if you have a question or comment, feel free to type it in. Talk about signage a little bit. I mean, I'm looking at the picture right now. There's clearly a nice sign on the depot.
Yeah.
What's turned up from the early days?
Yeah. So, looking at that depot, the sign, the round one is kind of like a tin sign. I haven't seen a lot of full-blown porcelain ones that I can think of. They're more painted flat sheet metal tin. And then the station sign below it is wood. And those have kind of turned up. Caboose Hobbies over the years had a bunch hanging there. They're all gone. The Colorado Railroad Museum has a bunch hanging in their museum. They kind of turn up here and there, but they usually have a lot of rot and a lot of like paint issues. But the way the paint was done, because of the lead, like it would cause the pore of the wood behind the lettering of where the sign was painted for the name to kind of raise up a little bit. So you kind of get that. So you see some things here and there, and it's, most of the station signs you're seeing are wood, but there's no like crazy porcelain signs or anything like that. It's all painted.
I mean, do you think that boils down to the constant financial shape they were in?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, the Rio Grande at one point was making a bunch of stuff in-house. There's a picture in one of those. It's either in, it's in one of the new White River production books, White River Press. And it's a guy literally making tallow pots, like in the shops, like soldering them, and everything's embossed D&RG RR, like or D&RG W. So it's really interesting. So as far as signs go, I mean, they can easily make them themselves. So,
well, and let's talk a little bit, speaking of pouring it in their own shop. I mean, obviously the shops are still there to some extent and involved with the scenic lines. I mean, talk a little bit how amazing it is that you can kind of hit the rewind button or transport back in time and actually see this stuff for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah, to me, I mean, that's the most amazing part, when you collect something from a railroad and then you can actually go write it. And you can be like, oh, this is where my lock was used. This is where my lantern was used. This is where my key was used. A guy would have worn this hat badge. I mean, it's just really something that kind of captures the imagination. And for me, that's kind of the best part of this hobby is show me where it was used. Like, how neat is that? Let me daydream. Let me, and you go to Durango and, there's just this smell of oil and grease and coal smoke. And it's just like, wow, this is what it was like, in the 1880s, the 1890s, turn of the century. Like life just moved at a different pace. And the smells were different than what we smell today. Today we walk by a McDonald's and like, oh, those fries smell good. But back then it's like, you're transported to something different, and a lot of it is very like a very, visceral experience of smells and sights and sounds that you don't experience every day. I hear planes fly over every day to the airport. You go there and you hear steam whistles. You see people oiling locomotives and you smell it and you feel it. And it's just very different. And then you can come home and hold these beautiful patinaed lanterns and be like, wow.
It was there one day.
Yeah, it was there one day,
Yeah.
Who owned it?
You can point to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Got a question. The lamp marked with number 39. Can you tell us more about these?
The lantern?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that is a Liberty. So the Liberty was kind of one of these oddball manufacturers. He I don't know if he was manufacturing lanterns for other industries, but he did not do a lot of railroad lanterns for some reason. So the number 39 Liberty, there was one that turned up in Ogden, a few years ago for some reason, which is weird because Ogden was like Rio Grande Western. And so I don't know how it got there. And then there was one on eBay like last week or a week and a half ago. But yeah, the Liberty's just this oddball manufacturer. They're very tall, beefy little lanterns, and there's less than 10 known. And, they always get a lot of attention when they come up for sale. So, but it's like I said, the Rio Grande for some reason just had all these oddball lantern makers, and you see like 1, 2, or 3 or 4 or less than 10 of them, and then that's it. You just don't see them. So yeah, number 39 is the style of globe, which is the typical extended base globe, 5 3/8 that goes inside a lantern. Some of the older globes were actually cast 39 on the back, but that is the standard number for what is an extended base globe that we say. So the Liberty number 39 was meant to take, these extended base globes. That's why it's called the number 39.
Yeah, excellent. Same way CT Ham, Mark 39.
Yeah, exactly.
Same way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did Liberty make any other any other railroads known, or just...
I don't know. I've only ever seen D&RG Liberties. There's got to be like some other railroad out. I don't know. We ought to post that on Facebook and ask if anyone has one from another road. But I've only ever seen the D&RG Liberties, and they're just embossed on the lid D&RG, not like RR or anything like that. And they're pretty cool. Like I said, the fount getting the bottom off is a pain.
Maybe that's why there's so few known to exist.
Yeah. I just don't think it was a very good design, because that's the problem, right? Is these guys are like, hey, railroads are huge at this time in the country. I want to sell them something, but there's all these patents that you're trying to get around. Well, let me rethink how to do the twist off and make it more difficult so I can get a patent and not infringe on Adams and Westlake and get sued, right? So it's like they come up, it's like the RR signal, let's do like flat bars and round bars, and let's do like a fount with 2 clips that you can't work with one hand. I mean, you can just imagine railroaders getting very upset about that. Yeah. So you just see these weird things where it's like, what were you guys thinking?
Yeah. So, looks like Brenda Hebel has chimed in. They have a Liberty marked CG and P.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go.
So at least one other road. Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah. Nice.
Richie. All right. Any other questions or comments? Well, Jason, this has been fantastic, buddy.
Hey, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Hey, we appreciate it. Thanks again for putting this together for us. It will live now in infamy on our YouTube page and
Right.
website, which is great. So folks that couldn't participate tonight are free to share it. Jason, again, I can't thank you enough for the time and effort. As everybody knows, this is all a volunteer basis. So thanks again for doing this. Just fantastic. Again, if you're not a member of RCAI, we would appreciate it if you check us out. We do these once a quarter, all through the year, and sometimes more if the topic arises. And of course, we're always looking for good topic ideas. So feel free to reach out to us and Diane Hoffman specifically if you have any ideas. But Jason, again, thanks for your time. And all of you all participated. This has been by far one of our most popular ones. So Jason, kudos to you for that. And we appreciate it. And we'll do it again next quarter.
All right. Sounds
All
good.
right, everybody. I hope you all have a great night and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks
All
a
right,
lot.
thank you.